As part of the John Maxwell team, we want to live out the principles that John teaches. This is our rule of 5 that we seek to practice every day: to lead, to grow, to create, to excel, and to serve. And remember, make today count.
Attitude is an inward feeling expressed by behavior. Well, that's why the attitude can be seen without a word being said. Haven't we all noticed the pout, the jutted jaw, the non-verbal cues? All the things that we wear, our expression, is the most important. Sometimes our attitude can be masked outwardly, and others who see us are fooled, but usually the cover-ups will not last long. There is that constant struggle as the attitude tries to wiggle its way out. Take, for instance, social media. Everyone on social media, you're either very, very happy or you're very, very sad. And I would venture to say that not all, but the majority of people that have to post how happy they are probably aren't that happy. And if you're posting how sad you are, then you probably have some underlying insecurity issues that for some reason you need to let everyone know how bad you're feeling right now. I don't know, it's just my opinion. But psychologist and philosopher James Allen, he stated, a person cannot travel within and stand still without. Soon what is happening within us will affect what is happening without. A hardened attitude is a dreadful disease. It causes a closed mind and a dark future. When our attitude is positive and conducive to growth, the mind expands and the progress begins. Attitude determines success or failure. John Maxwell states while leading a conference in South Carolina, he tried the following experiment. And he asked the audience, what word describes what will determine our happiness, acceptance, our peace, and success? The audience began to express words such as job, education, money, time, and finally someone said attitude. Such an important area of their lives was a second thought. And our attitude is the primary force that will determine whether we succeed or fail. And for some, attitude presents a difficulty in every opportunity. For others, it presents an opportunity in every difficulty. Some climb with a positive attitude while others fail with a negative one. And here are 7 axioms about attitude to help you better understand how it impacts a person's life. Attitude axiom number 1. Our attitude determines our approach to life. Our attitude tells us what we expect from life. Like an airplane, if our nose is pointed up, we are taking off. But if it's pointed down, we may be headed for a crash. One of my favorite stories is about a grandpa and grandma who visited their grandchildren. Each afternoon, grandpa would lie down for a nap. One day, as a practical joke, the kids decided to put Limburger cheese in his mustache. But quite soon, he did wake up sniffing. "Why, this room stinks," he exclaimed as he got up and went out into the kitchen. He wasn't there long until he decided that the kitchen smelled too. So he walked outdoors for a breath of fresh air, and much to his surprise, the open air brought no relief, and he proclaimed, "The whole world stinks." How true that is in life. When we carry Limburger cheese in our attitudes, the whole world smells bad. We are individually responsible for our own view of life. The truth has been known for ages, and it's contained in Scripture. Quote, "For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap." Unquote. Our attitude toward and action in life help determine what happens to us. It'd be impossible to estimate the number of jobs lost, the number of promotions missed, the number of sales not made, and the number of marriages ruined by poor attitudes. But almost daily we witness jobs that are held by hated and marriages that are tolerated by unhappy. All because people are waiting for others or the world to change instead of realizing that they are responsible for their own behavior. Attitude axiom number 2. Our attitude determines our relationships with people. All of life is impacted by your relationships with people. Yet establishing relationships is difficult. You can't get along with some people, and you can't make it without them. Well, that's why it's essential to build proper relationships with others in our crowded world. The Stanford Research Institute says that the money you make in any endeavor is determined only by 12.5% by knowledge and 87.5% by your ability to deal with people. Now let's think about that. 12.5% by your knowledge and 87.5% by the ability to deal with people. So 87.5% of people knowledge and 12.5% of product knowledge equals success. Well, that's why Teddy Roosevelt said, quote, "The most important single ingredient to the formula of success is knowing how to get along with people," unquote. And why John D. Rockefeller said, quote, "I will pay more for the ability to deal with people than any other ability under the sun," unquote. When the attitude we possess places others first and we see people as important, then our perspective will reflect their viewpoint, not ours. Until we walk in the other person's shoes and see life through another's eyes, we will be like the man who angrily jumped out of his car after a collision with another car. "Why don't you people watch where you're driving?" he shouted. "You're the 4th car I've hit today." Usually, the person who rises within an organization has a good attitude. The promotions did not give that individual an outstanding attitude, but an outstanding attitude resulted in promotions. Attitude axiom number 3. Often, our attitude is the only difference between success and failure. History's greatest achievements have been made by men who excelled only slightly over the masses of others in their fields. Well, this could be called the principle of the slight edge. Many times that slight difference was attitude. The former Israeli prime minister underlined this truth in one of her interviews. She said, "All my country has is spirit. We don't have petroleum dollars. We don't have mines of great wealth in the ground. We don't have the support of the worldwide public. All Israel has is the spirit of its people. And if the people lose their spirit, even the United States of America cannot save us." Certainly, aptitude is important to our success in life. Yet success and failure in any undertaking is caused more by mental attitude than by mental capacities. A Yale University president some years ago gave similar advice to a former president of Ohio State. He said, "Always be kind to your A and B students. Someday one of them will return to the campus as a good professor. But also be kind to your C students. Someday one of them will return and build a $2 million science laboratory." There is very little difference in people, but that little difference makes a big difference. The little difference is attitude. The big difference is whether it is positive or negative. Attitude axiom number 4. Our attitude at the beginning of a task will affect its outcome more than anything else. You know, coaches understand the importance of their teams having the right attitude before facing a tough opponent. Surgeons want to see their patients mentally prepared before going into surgery. Job seekers know that their prospective employer is looking for more than just skills that they can apply for work. Public speakers want a conducive atmosphere before they communicate to their audience. But why? Because the right attitude in the beginning ensures success at the end. You're acquainted with the saying, "All's well that ends well." An equal truth is all's well that begins well. Most projects fail or succeed before they begin. A young mountain climber and an experienced guide were ascending a high peak in the Sierras. Early one morning, the young climber was suddenly awakened by a tremendous cracking sound. He was convinced that the end of the world had come. The guide responded, "It's not the end of the world, just the dawning of a new day." As the sun rose, it was merely hitting the ice and causing it to melt. Well, many times we have been guilty of viewing our future challenges as the sunset of life rather than the sunrise of a bright new opportunity. For instance, there's a story of two shoe salesmen. They were sent to an island to sell shoes. The first salesman, upon arrival, he was shocked to realize that no one on the island wore shoes. Well, immediately he sent a telegram to his home office in Chicago, and he said, "We'll return home tomorrow. No one wears shoes." The second salesman was thrilled by the same realization. Immediately, he wired the home office in Chicago also. But he said, "Please send me 10,000 shoes. Everyone here needs them." Attitude axiom number 5. Our attitude can turn our problems into blessings. What's the difference between an obstacle and an opportunity? It's our attitude towards it. Every opportunity has a difficulty, and every difficulty has an opportunity. When confronted with a difficult situation, a person with an outstanding attitude makes the best of it, while he gets the worst of it. Life can be likened to a grindstone. Whether it grinds you down or polishes you depends on what you are made of. While attending a conference of young leaders, I heard this statement, that no society has ever developed tough men during times of peace. Adversity is prosperity to those who possess a great attitude. Kites rise against, not with, the wind. When the adverse wind of criticism blows, allow it to be to you what the blast wind is to a kite. A force against it that lifts it higher. Well, a kite would not fly unless it had controlling tension of the string to tie it down. It's equally true in life. Consider the following successes that were accomplished through a positive attitude. When Napoleon's school companions made sport of him because of his humble origin and poverty, he devoted himself entirely to his books, quickly rising above his classmates in scholarship. He commanded their respect. Soon he was regarded as the brightest in the class. Few people knew Abraham Lincoln until the great weight of the Civil War showed his character. And you know, Robin Crusoe was written in prison. John Bunyan wrote Pilgrim's Progress in the Bedford jail. Sir Walter Raleigh wrote the history of the world during a 13-year imprisonment. Luther translated the Bible while confined in the castle of Wartburg. For 10 years, Dante, author of the Divine Comedy, worked in exile and under the sentence of death. Beethoven was almost totally deaf and burdened with sorrow when he produced his greatest works. When God wants to educate someone, he does not send them to the school of graces, but to the school of necessities. Great leaders emerge when crises occur in the lives of people who achieve. We read repeatedly of a terrible troubles that force them to rise above the commonplace. Not only do they find the answers, but they also discover a tremendous power within themselves. This force within explodes into a mighty wave when circumstances seem to overcome. Then out steps the athlete, the author, the statesman, the scientist, or the businessman. David Sornoff said, "There's plenty of security in the cemetery. I long for opportunity." Attitude axiom number 6. Our attitude can give us an uncommonly positive perspective. An uncommonly positive perspective is able to help us accomplish some uncommon goals. I've keenly observed the different approaches and results achieved by a positive thinker and by a person filled with fear and apprehension. For example, in ancient Israel, when Goliath came up against the Hebrews, the soldiers all thought, "He's so big we can never kill him." David looked at the giant and thought, "He's so big I can't miss." George Sweetie, former president of Moody Bible Institute, tells a story about a Scotsman who was an extremely hard worker and expected all the men under him to be the same. His men would tease him, "Scotty, don't you know that Rome wasn't built in a day?" And he'd say, "Yes, I know that, but I wasn't the foreman on that job." Individuals whose attitudes cause them to approach life from an entirely positive perspective are not always understood. They're what we would call a no-limit people. In other words, they don't accept the normal limitations of life as most people do. They're unwilling to accept the accepted just because it is accepted. Their response to self-limiting conditions will probably be why instead of okay. Certainly they have limitations. Their gifts are not so plentiful that they cannot fail, but they're determined to walk to the very edge of their potential and the potential of their goals before accepting defeat. They're like bumblebees. According to the theory of aerodynamics, as demonstrated through the wind tunnel test, the bumblebee should not be able to fly. Because of the size, weight, and shape of the body, relationship to the total wingspan, flying is scientifically impossible. The bumblebee, being ignorant of scientific theory, goes ahead and flies anyway and makes honey every day. The future not only looks bright when the attitude is right, but also the present is much more enjoyable. The positive person understands that the journey of success is as enjoyable as the destination. Attitude axiom number 7. Your attitude is not automatically good because you are a religious person. Now, it's noteworthy that the 7 deadly sins, pride, covetousness, lust, envy, anger, gluttony, and sloth, are all matters of attitude, inner spirit, and motives. But sadly, many people of faith carry with them inner spirit problems. They're like the elder brother contained in the parable of the prodigal son, thinking that they do everything right, while the younger brother left home to live a wild life, and the elder brother chose to stay home with his father. He wasn't going to spend his time sowing wild oats. Yet when the younger brother returned home, some of the elder brother's wrong attitudes began to surface. First was a feeling of self-importance. The older brother was out in the field doing what he ought to do, but he got mad when the party began at home. His father would never let him have one for himself. That was followed by a feeling of self-pity. The older brother said, "Look, for so many years I've been serving you, and you have never thrown a party for me. But when your son, who wasted all that money, comes home, you give him a big celebration." Well, often people overlook the true meaning of the story of the prodigal son. They forget that they're not one but 2 prodigals. The younger brother is guilty of sins of the flesh, whereas the elder brother is guilty of sins of the spirit. His problem is his attitude. At the end of the parable, it is the elder brother, the second prodigal, who is outside the father's house. And that's a good lesson for all of us to remember. A poor attitude will take us places we don't want to go. Sometimes it can even take us completely out of the game. On the other hand, a good attitude puts us in the place of the greatest potential. Perhaps you're not sure if your attitude is where it ought to be. Or maybe you're leading someone whose attitude isn't as positive as it could be. How do you address that? Well, first you need to know how a person's attitude is even formed. And that's the subject of the next chapter.